L'chaim tovim.
Good. You may be seated.
Shabbat shalom. Welcome, everyone. Great to be together. Loved your energy this evening. I could feel it. In this week's reading, we witness a dramatic power struggle, a struggle that in the text has national repercussions. A cabal of influential rebels tries to take power from Moses, daring to risk jail time and much of their lives to promote their own self-interest over the sacred destiny of their people. In this story, their downfall is stark and dreadful. Yet the Torah teaches, even though Korach dies, his descendants live on. We sometimes see them today. Cynical, political, religious, and/or communal leaders cloaking self-interest in the language of decency and democracy, niceness and nationalism, goodness and God. I will leave it to you to make your own parallels and analogies to anything going on today. I don't think it's hard to do. And we can all do it differently, and we might all have a legitimate point. But I want to focus on something else, because the Torah was not written for our public leaders. It was written for everyone, for you and me. And I think you and I sometimes also play the role of Korach. We too live with an ongoing conflict between an inner Moses and an inner Korach, between humility and arrogance, between selflessness and selfishness. And until we can hear and manage the difference between those two voices, our actions will not be effective in countering the power of any Korach at large. We need to be clear when it is the voice of our own needy, small-minded self that advises us to act, and when it is the mature, wise voice that speaks from our deepest and best values and truth. We need a practice of reflection to discern which voice is guiding us when. Fortunately, we can find some guidance from this week's Torah reading. In our tradition, Moses is seen as humility embodied, a true servant of God. The Hasidic master known as the Sfat Emet understood Moses as being so far from pride in his bearing that people could not fathom his modesty. In Parashat Korach, we see Moses in that place of humility, able to lead because he loves God and the Israelites with every fiber of his being, despite his constant frustration with both the people and God. Twice he falls on his face, once before Korach when trying to stop the rebellion, and once before God when trying to stop God from destroying the people. Moses acts from the deep understanding that Korach's challenge has nothing to do with him. It is rather a challenge to God. For Moses knows himself to be the vessel through which God's vision for the Israelites could become manifest, not a man who needs to prove himself to an insolent competitor. Throughout the journeys of the Israelites, we see Moses grow as a spiritual leader. From a reluctant young man who himself struggles with anger and a lack of self-confidence, to become the quintessential leader, one who is able to overcome his own ego in order to serve a much greater cause. Finally, he becomes one who accepts God's decision that he will die, and that he will die outside the land of Israel, the place to which he has worked so long to shepherd the people. Korach presents himself quite differently. His challenge to Moses is rooted in personal ambition not love of God, and not concern for the people. Unlike Moses, who hesitated to take the leadership that God offered, Korach seeks to grab it for himself. Rashi, Nachmanides, and other commentators interpret the opening two words of the portion, Vayikach Korach, literally Moses took, to mean that Korach took himself apart from the people. Korach would have done nothing to stop God from destroying the Israelites, for his goal was not to help the people, but to become their leader. Those are two different things. Unlike Moses, Korach sees the whole story as being about himself. Regarding this Torah portion, then, we might each ask, how do I recognize Korach in my own thoughts and actions? And how do I liberate the consciousness that Moses had? In my life, I find that Korach seems to pop up most frequently when I am afraid. What if I don't inspire? What if I don't succeed at something? What if I let someone down? What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't pay my bills? Sometimes in moments of doubt, I do make myself the central actor, starring in the tragedy of JB, a work that perhaps only the master Greek tragedian Aeschylus could have successfully written. In that place of fear, I separate myself from the community that is doing the work, and I clutch for some way to feel in control. But I can never alone see the whole. When in this place, I cannot possibly make wise decisions. But if I make the time, like Moses, to fall on my face and breathe and reflect, I can hear the I shouting out in all its grandiosity. And I reply, Rav Lecha, enough of this, Korach. Thus I acknowledge that once again, I've made the story about me and my fears. Yet in that space, Moses can emerge and call me back to humility, to the recognition that I, like everybody else, am but a bit player on this stage. I can rekindle the trust that I have in the wisdom of the unfolding of the work and in the wisdom of my colleagues, friends, and family to remind me that a sunrise at some point will follow and overtake the sunset. Then once again, I can focus on my mission, not my mess, my purpose, not my pettiness. The Korach in all of us gets triggered by different emotions: fear, anger, anxiety, greed, doubt. When this happens, we lose sight of the whole and become caught up in our own inner particular dramas. Our needs start to eclipse what's going on around us. Moses' path and ours is to move from the narrow place of doubt, fear, anger, or jealousy to an expansive covenanted life of mutual care and responsibility, such as we find here at HaYam. In such a community, all people are holy. We can remind each other that what matters is not the ambition of the self, but the work of helping to make the soul, the home, the office, and the world a safer, wiser, more compassionate place for all. Such a perspective helps each of us to come closer to being, like Moses, a humble servant of God. Shabbat Shalom. And before we continue, I just wanted to comment from a Jewish perspective. Ever since the leak of the Supreme Court decision on abortion, we have been teaching about what Judaism says and doesn't say. Our conservative movement came out with a very strong statement in the wake of the decision. And I'd like to say that, just briefly, Jewish law is much more nuanced on abortion than either the Catholic position or Roe versus Wade. Truthfully, the Catholic view classes a fertilized embryo as a full human being, but that, to Jews, mistakes the potential for the actual. To this point, we have ample evidence, in fact, that somewhere between 75 to 80% of fertilized eggs in women's bodies self-miscarry, most in the first month of pregnancy, often before the woman knows that she is pregnant. The Talmud, based on Exodus 21, which we studied when we did a class on abortion, and undoubtedly on the miscarriages that the rabbis witnessed, classifies the developing embryo as maya de alma, simply liquid, during the first 40 days of pregnancy, where it does not even have the status of a fetus in Jewish law, and later on becomes ka'ubar imo, like the limb of its mother, from then until birth. It is only when the head, or in a breech birth, the major part of the fetus's body emerges, that it becomes a nephesh, a full human being. Thus, due to Judaism's reverence for life, the mother's health and life have universally been prioritized over a fetus's. Consequently, feticide is not the same as homicide in Jewish law. At the same time, the embryo and later the fetus is still a developing human being. And we do have a duty, we Jews, to procreate, an obligation that is especially important to remember in this post-Shoah era when we Jews are facing a major demographic crisis. So abortion is required by Jewish law when the life or physical health or mental health of the woman is at stake, and permitted when there is an elevated risk to the woman over that of a normal pregnancy, or when the fetus will suffer from a lethal or devastating disease. That is quite a bit of terrain. Nonetheless, Jewish law would by and large prohibit abortion when done for other less considerable reasons. In that way, Jewish law is still less permissive than Roe versus Wade. With all of that said, with all the nuance of Jewish law and the understanding that there are many situations and circumstances that women may find themselves in, and that Jewish law is always done on a case-by-case basis where a single generic statement can't possibly apply to all. Nonetheless, Jewish law, like Catholic law, it seems to us, should not be the basis for American law. And neither should the stance of any other religion. Thomas Jefferson asserted that when Americans overwhelmingly agree on a moral issue, like murder is wrong, theft and rape is wrong, or the duty to pay taxes is correct, or educating your children is a positive moral thing to create moral citizens, then the state may enforce that moral stance as law. But Thomas Jefferson also said that when Americans disagree about a moral issue, the government should leave it to each citizen to determine what is proper. Abortion clearly fits into the latter category, where Americans are very divided, mostly according to each of their religious perspectives. And all of those religious perspectives have spiritual legitimacy within their religions. So the new Supreme Court decision that enables states to prohibit abortion altogether, even for the life of a mother, and substantially restrict it, violates Jefferson's wise balance, it seems to me, of how people of multiple faiths and people of no faith can live together amicably and productively. As such, I hope I'm wrong, but it seems bad for mutual respect among Americans and bad for American unity. And that, to me, is extremely important. It is also a major blow to the individual liberty that is one important source of American identity and pride. As I may have hinted, it additionally violates freedom of religion. For in many states, abortion will be prohibited in cases in which Jewish law and the stances of other religious groups require it or at least permit it. How will those rabbis and religious leaders be able to counsel effectively according to their own traditions if the state says you cannot follow out the dictates of those traditions? It effectively establishes the Catholic view of the fetus in violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. And Jewish Americans should not be forced to live by Catholic canon law. Let me add, it is not about a woman's right to choose, though of course to many modern people that is deeply important. But what I'm saying, it's about our collective responsibility to care for the mental and physical health of the mother. That's where our duties should lie, with the living and for the living. And when we can't all agree on the status of a fetus, we should all be able to agree that the status of a woman's life is precious and holy. Shabbat Shalom. And with that, I'd like us to sing Olam Chesed Yibaneh, which you can find in your handout at the bottom of page 4. Because beyond this, whatever the law is, we still have to live together. And we need to do so with the goodness of our hearts as Americans for other Americans, with those we disagree. And if this Supreme Court decision stands, we still will live together with other Americans, even if